Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Owen Riel, and this is the Collective Record. Oh, and Team Canada won today. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 14 of the Collective Record. As always, I am Owen Riel. This is Emma Venator for her last week as co-host. And we're going to jump right into things today. There's a lot of... Oh boy, it's been quite the week. We've had... Well, today, first of all, great news. You saw in the intro. Team Canada won gold at the World Juniors. Yay. Good stuff. We're all very excited about that. Very excellent. Everyone's... yeah. Good stuff. Other than that, not especially positive this week. It was pretty... Hectic, depressing, scary, sad, not good week. So we have three major topics today. One we're going to cover after the break, and that's going to be Iran and the killing of the second-in-command general. And we're going to first cover the OSSTF strike and Australia's wildfires. Yeah, not a great week for the international community, especially Australia. In Australia, in case you're not familiar, although I'm sure everyone's pretty familiar with what's going on in Australia, wildfires have scorched an area of over 60,000 square kilometers, which is about the size of Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island combined. Yeah, that's I believe that's their biggest bushfire ever in their bushfire season. I'm quite sure of that. We actually have 65 Canadian firefighters over there helping to stop the blaze, although out of 150 fires, I guess they've sort of separated them. Only 64 are contained up to this point. They've seen a little bit of relief, bit of a cooler weather pattern and rain in one area. So that was good for the firefighters and Australians, but overall it's still a really bad situation. And some have speculated that the worst is yet to come, although that is just speculation at this point. So let's remain optimistic and hope that, the worst has already hit us and it's only going to be, it's only going to get better from here. So let's remain optimistic, that's all we can do at this point, and cheer on, Australian firefighters, Canadian firefighters, from all over the world. The wildfire was amplified originally, and it continues to be amplified by hotter conditions and drier conditions that have ever been seen in Australia's wildfires. In fact, Australia's mean temperature, the average temperature, has actually warmed over about a degree in the last about 100 years. So it's become significantly warmer in Australia, as we've seen throughout the globe, but particularly in Australia. The Amazon fires, just for perspective here, actually this shocked me. The Amazon fires burned 900,000 hectares of land, and was obviously considered a massive disaster, because it was. But Australia has had over 4 million hectares of land burned. So the Amazon fires were 900,000, and now the Australian fires have been 4 million. That's crazy. Like, just the sheer size. I mean, 2 provinces. It has burned 2 provinces. So scientists obviously have said that a major factor in this is climate change. Climate change really significantly contributed to this, because they've never seen anything to this scale. The wildfires killed 23 people, over 500 million animals. Just a huge, horrible disaster going on in Australia. I think I read actually I think it was either the BBC or the New York Times. I read that in Canberra, Australia's capital, that there's a smoky haze over everything. and that the hazard levels of the air quality is 10 times worse than it normally is. And that's in Canberra. That's actually not where the wildfire. That's a bit away from where the wildfires are. So you can see how where they actually are is obviously much worse. But all of Australia is feeling very depressed over this incident. I guess
They're getting the effects of it.
yeah, it's horrible, and this is what climate change is and is going to continue to do over the next decades, centuries. Now we're at the point where earlier the UN said that we could see a warming of up to 3 degrees Celsius in the next couple hundred years if we don't rapidly make changes to the amount of emissions that we put into the atmosphere. So I think, without commenting too much on that, if this is what we're seeing now, imagine what we're going to be seeing in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. This is what we're seeing now. 4 million, over 4 million hectares of land burned now. And we're only beginning to see the disastrousness of, that might not be a word, disastrousness of climate change and the natural disasters that will be caused by it. Yeah, I mean, I guess I just wanted to cover that, not too in depth. I just wanted to sort of talk about it and be hopeful that it's going to get better rather than get worse. Although, we have scientific reasons to believe that it may not get better anytime soon. As well, feel free to ask questions throughout this first half if you want to, whatever, about any topic. That's totally fine. If you want to talk about American politics or international issues, whatever you want to ask me about. If you want to ask me when my birthday is, probably won't tell you, but you're welcome to ask anyway. Yeah, just ask whatever questions you want. I also want to talk about the OSSTF strike, because this has been going on now for how long? Months. We've had this is the fourth OSSTF strike. So in case you don't know, the OSSTF has announced that they will be doing another one-day strike this Wednesday. For some reason, I wrote January 3rd. It's not January 3rd because today is the 5th. I believe January 8th. January 8th is the day that they plan to do it. In a few different school boards. They've kind of been rotating school boards in which they strike at. So, we have another round of strikes this week. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the OSSTF union president has actually said that all it will take for the union to call off the strike is if the provincial government returns class sizes or commits to returning class sizes to the 2018-2019 levels. Which is, I don't know, maybe it's just my own skewed pro-union opinion, but that seems very reasonable, right? Like, that seems like that's a pretty good compromise for the government, and they should take that right away, because OSSTF is not a small union. They're pretty powerful, and for them to say, well, we know we have 4 or 5 different issues on the board here, but if you just commit to returning class sizes, then we'll call off the strike, we'll come back to the table and work out the other issues. That's pretty reasonable, honestly. I think maybe even a little too, they're maybe giving a little too much there. Maybe not. Maybe it's good that they're sort of committing to that. But I think that's interesting that they're willing to give that much this early when they've only done 3 one-day strikes so far. The union obviously is still even if the Ontario government still commits to that, they're still going to have to talk about mandatory e-learning and their pay raise, because you can't not talk about those things. I mean, the government is looking to put on a pay cap of 1%, which essentially means that teachers' pay will not be rising at the level that inflation does. So they'll effectively, it's a pay cut, right? It's just sort of a, I don't know, putting lipstick on a pay cut. That's probably not, doesn't really make any sense, but you know what I mean. It's a pay cut essentially, and that really hurts for teachers who are new, or you know it's not good, especially for occasional teachers. Like, that's really who that's going to hit the hardest, is not necessarily teachers who have been teaching for a long time, they've got their contract, they've settled in. New teachers, occasional teachers, teachers who have just started their contract employment, that's going to hurt their, that could hurt their financial situation a great deal. And it's very reasonable for CUPE to look for, or sorry, not CUPE, OSSTF, to look for the government to keep their wages rising at the level of inflation. They're not asking for a raise here. They're asking just to stay at the level of inflation, which in my view is very reasonable, because we're talking about secondary school teachers here. These people are some of the most important in forming the next generation, right? These need to be the best of the best, and I think their pay should reflect that. And at present, I think it does reflect that. But starting to lower their pay is not going to make the best and brightest want to come and teach secondary school students. If you take their pay down, it's harder to get the best of the best, right? So I don't think that it's at all a good idea to start chipping away at the wages of teachers, right? It's interesting to note the length of this negotiation as opposed to the length of the negotiation with CUPE. As we know, CUPE and the government were negotiating during an election, and the provincial government at 9 o'clock, when the deadline was at 12 o'clock for a strike, struck a deal with CUPE. And we have to wonder if that was because Doug Ford and the PC government in Ontario didn't want to hurt the federal Conservatives' chances in the election. It was wrapped up pretty swiftly before any strike happened, because they didn't want any bad PR. At least that's what I would speculate. Maybe you take away a different conclusion, but that's definitely what I would take away from the situation. But now that there's not an active election, and there's no provincial election, no federal election anytime soon, the provincial government doesn't really feel any pressure to negotiate with OSSTF in a productive way, because nobody's, they think probably that the public will forget about this. And it's not going to hurt anybody because there's no election, so they may as well just hold out as long as possible. And this is the case with other unions, and probably will be the case with other unions that the Ford government has to deal with in the future. So that's sort of what we're dealing with here. It's a very interesting situation, and this has obviously happened before. Like, we had under Mike Harris, another PC, there were strikes against him, and they were much longer than any strikes that had taken place in recent times. But it's an interesting phenomenon to watch when the provincial government is sort of accusing secondary school teachers here of just wanting money, when their primary focus, obviously, as evidenced by them offering to stop their protest based on class sizes this Wednesday, obviously their focus is class sizes and really not income. Of course, income is important because people need to live and teachers need to have a decent wage, but it's obvious here that class sizes and the quality of children's education is the focus and not teachers' pay. Actually, that was remarked on in the comments here. Can you talk about why people believe that teachers are protesting about money instead of class sizes? I I don't really know why people think that, because obviously the union, as I just said, the union has offered to stop the protest for class sizes, or the strike. I just think it has to do with who you get your information from. I think it has to do with if you believe the union or if you believe the government. It's pretty clear that what the union is saying right now, that their primary focus is class sizes and e-learning, but mainly class sizes. So I think if you read into the statements by the union, I don't know what other conclusion you can come to, quite frankly. I think there really is only one conclusion, and that's that their main focus is class sizes. Or our class, I don't know, is or are class sizes? Is class sizes? Are class sizes? Are? Yeah, we'll go with that. Um, yeah, it's I don't really get why. I think there are some people who just have a sense that unions are kind of evil too. Like I think there are just some people who don't like unions, and I think no matter what they see coming from unions, even if it's something positive, like what they've recently seen from OSSTF, that no matter what a union does, it will be wrong. So I think that's really how I would explain that more than anything else. Um, but yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting times we live in when we live in a very hyper social mediated time, right? Because a union would have, it'd be a much different playing field for a union and a government playing off each other without like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, right? Like I remember when we had the first 1 day strike. OSSTF actually released. It was hilarious. They released a picture of a few of their negotiating team. I don't know exactly who it was, but the people who were set to negotiate with the government, waiting for any contact with the government. And they took a picture at like 9:30 and said, "Still waiting for the government to contact us." And it's so interesting that now they can use social media as a tool to sort of pressure the provincial government, right? Like they can use it to sort of raise awareness and bring people together to support the union. But at the same time, you can also use it to it also creates division among people who support the union or who support the government. So we'll really have to keep a close eye on this issue from this point forward. Yeah. So I think at this point, actually, we're going to take a little bit of an early break, and then we're going to talk about the issue of the week, which is Iran and the United States. Don't go away. And we're back from the break. So, we're going to talk about something very serious that happened this week. I apologize in advance if I pronounce any names incorrectly. I don't intend to. I just, it happens. So this week, I assume most of you are familiar, but this week the United States did a drone strike that killed Qasem Soleimani, who is second in command in Iran, and is a very important major general. It's sort of had a sense of fear, like we've seen. I'm sure all of us have seen like World War III memes, and that sort of thing. Everyone's like, "Yo, we're all gonna get drafted." So I don't really want to speculate on that. I'm gonna say probably not. Probably not gonna have World War III. You're probably not gonna get drafted. So ease your fears a little bit. I don't think anybody's getting drafted. Although I've been wrong before, and I may be wrong again. So what I want to focus on though is the history of U.S.-Iran relations and some of the things that have happened. Because I think it's important to sort of understand where the U.S. Iran relationship has been before this point. Okay, so let's do a little bit of a dive into that. The first notable event that I'm going to focus on here is the U.S. UK led coup of Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953. Mohammad Mossadegh was a democratically elected leader who tried to nationalize Iran's oil industry, and that is why the United States and the United Kingdom orchestrated the coup, because the United Kingdom before this point was the main and in some cases the sole beneficiary of Iranian oil, and Mohammad Mossadegh was elected by Iran's people and wanted Iran's people to benefit from their oil production. So this is obviously not to the liking of the United Kingdom, and the United States sort of joined in and said, "Well, we're going to get rid of Mohammad Mossadegh then," and they reinstalled Iran's dictatorial Shah, who was dictator in Iran up until 1979 from 1953. And what's actually interesting about Mohammad Mossadegh is he was very very pro democracy. He actually would try to restrict the Shah, because in Iran at that point they sort of had almost like a constitutional monarchy, but the Shah had way more power than say the Queen of England does over us, right? He had actual governing powers that he could make decisions and had a right to govern. But Mohammad Mossadegh was very like, no, we're not going to have monarchist rule. We're going to have a democracy. We're going to have elections, and the prime minister and the parliament, the president and the parliament are going to rule, and not the monarchy. And he was actually also very pro separation of religion and state as well. But the United States and the United Kingdom ousted him regardless of that. Then in the 1960s, Iran began seeking nuclear technology and was actually given a 5 megawatt nuclear reactor from the United States. And during this period of cooperation with the United States, Iran experienced a great amount of economic growth, but also experienced a widening autocracy, with Iran's secret police being trained by the CIA. Now, after this period of economic growth through the mid 60s to mid 70s, they experienced a lot of sort of accelerated authoritarianism, and the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, spread his religious message to Iranians from outside the country, because he was exiled from Iran. And this actually led to the establishment of the current regime, the Islamic Republic of Iran, which was established in 1979. Now, after the Islamic Republic was established, Iranian students took 66 U.S. Marines and diplomats hostage, which caused Jimmy Carter to freeze $12 billion in Iranian assets. And in the early 80s, Iraq declared war on Iran, and the United States backed Iraq Um, and because they wanted to stop Iran from expanding into Iraq and having more power in the region. And the U.S. continued to back Iraq after a chemical attack. Back Iraq after chemical attack. Sorry, that kind of rhymed. Not appropriate for what I'm saying, but it rhymed. They continued actually to back Iraq when they chemically attacked Iran. They condemned the attack, but they still continued to support them. Um, then in 1984, the United States designated Iran as a state sponsor of terrorism, citing 60 incidents of Iranian-backed attacks against moderate Arabs, France, and the United States. Then in 1988, the United States accidentally took down a passenger aircraft, killing 290 Iranian civilians. And the United States, they said that they mistook it for a fighter jet, and so this was in 1988. Now, oh jeez, I screwed up my place in the document. In the early 2000s, the United States confirmed that Iran had enriched uranium, which was very scary to the United States because obviously you've looked at those incidents and said, wow, the United States and Iran are sort of beating to butt heads here historically, right? So for Iran to have enriched uranium is a scary thing for the United States. The United States does not want Iran to have nuclear weapons. That's the ultimate, like, that's really bad. We don't want that at all for the United States. Now, during Obama's presidency, so this is after George W. Bush, his administration discovered enriched uranium. During Obama's presidency, a deal was struck that Iran would disable key parts of its nuclear reactor to prevent development of weapons-grade uranium. So this was seen in a lot of ways in the international community as a couple other European countries went in on this deal. This was a big victory because this would prevent Iran from having nuclear weapons. So this was seen as a big victory. The United States agreed to lift some of the sanctions, unfreeze some of the assets that they have of Iran's in exchange for this deal. And actually later on, during Trump's presidency, the International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed that Iran was holding up to its end of the deal. So this deal was successful. Iran was sticking to its commitments. The United States, up to that point, stuck to its commitments, and everything was sort of going well. Now, in 2018, Donald Trump left the Iran nuclear deal because the deal did not limit Iran's ballistic missile program, which was not the focus of the original deal. The original deal was meant to disable parts of the reactor that would allow them to get the uranium needed for nuclear weapons. But Trump left the deal because of ballistic missile. Like, the thing, it doesn't really connect. And the deal was widely seen as a success. And Trump just sort of decided unilaterally that it was not a success. And this was something that was espoused by Republicans before Donald Trump was even the nominee for the Republicans. But it just wasn't true because the IAEA confirmed that Iran was holding up to their end of the deal. So it's sort of, this isn't really, this is where things start to really go downhill as of recent times, right? This is where the United States sort of jumps the gun a little bit. Trump decides that the deal isn't working when he misstates the goal of the deal and the success that the deal has actually had. This is where we start to see things are starting to go badly. And now after that, the next major event is obviously the killing of Qasem Soleimani, which has ignited the recent exacerbated tensions between the United States and Iran. And Iran has pledged to swiftly retaliate against the United States, which is the thing that really has everybody worried more than anything, right? Because things have sort of happened where the United States has, maybe done a drone strike that's hit a certain target, right? But nothing's really happened. The fact that Iran is threatening to respond and has threatened to respond harshly, that's sort of what we should be afraid of here, because that hasn't really happened. That they've responded really boldly, and we don't know what they mean by responding, swiftly. We don't know what that means yet. We don't know what degree of military action that is. But of course, Trump has also threatened to hit 52 different sites in Iran if Iran is to respond. So we're really kind of building upwards here as far as the tensions and the stakes that are at play here. So recently, actually, this was this morning at about I don't know if it was technically last night at like 12 o'clock here, or if it was actually this morning here, our time. Sorry, but Iraq's parliament passed a resolution instructing their government to work towards expelling foreign troops from the country, because as we know, this drone strike actually happened in Iraq. So Iraq has now voted to start expelling American troops from the country. They don't want any foreign troops now, which is very interesting that they've taken sort of that position. They're like, this was a disaster. No more foreign troops. It's interesting. It's very interesting to see that, because up to that point, there are several military bases in Iraq that are American military bases that they're saying, we don't want foreign troops here anymore, and that's kind of it's an interesting phenomenon, to say the least. I feel like I keep saying the word interesting, but it's interesting. um, Now I want to talk a little bit about historical precedent with the United States and what they've done in relation to this incident, with the incident with Mohammad Mossadegh when they ousted him. We can sort of see that the United States has felt that it is their right to install friendly leaders and stage has staged coups on countries with unfavorable leaders to the United States. Iran is just one example. Mohammad Mossadegh is just one example. We can also look to Chile, where the United States aided a coup against Salvador Allende, who was nationalizing Chilean mines, many of which were United States owned. And then after Allende, very similar to Iran, Chile had a 17-year military dictatorship under Augusto Pinochet and the junta. So this is something that maybe the United States is relatively familiar with. Think about Iran has a democratically elected leader who nationalizes an industry that is, the United States and the United Kingdom's interest, because they own some of that property, and they respond by ousting the leader that is not economically favorable to them. Then they do it again in the early 70s with Salvador Allende. He's sort of a socialist leader who nationalizes Chilean copper mines. They're owned by the United States. He buys them out, and the United States says, nope, I don't like that, so I'm going to oust him and replace him with a military dictatorship that's going to last for 17 years. And Chileans are going to see, horrible economic conditions where they can't afford even 3 meals a day, right? This is obviously something that the United States is relatively familiar with. And this is really the reason I talk about this, and I talk about Mohammad Mossadegh, and I talk about Iran's history in the last 70 years, is because that's how we've gotten to here, right? That's how we had a military dictatorship, and then Iran's Islamic Republic, because the United States overthrew their original their democratic government under Mohammad Mossadegh, and then helped the government's military police use the CIA to train Iranian military police, and then Iran rebelled and created an Islamic Republic, which now is a country that is not is a huge violator of human rights, and they've had a lot of human rights abuses. But I would argue that some amount of cause for that is because of the ousting of Mohammad Mossadegh, right? As with the current, with poor conditions in Chile, I would argue that has to do in part that the United States sort of threw over a democratically elected leader and put in a military dictatorship instead. These things, well, yes, these events happened a while ago, are very much still relevant to the current political climate, and we need to, just because it's the United States doesn't mean that we're not going to say, hey, that's wrong. You can't do that. You can't just get rid of leaders that you don't like, right? And up to this point, we haven't really talked about it that much. I mean, I don't hear people talk about how Mohamed Mossadegh was ousted, or Salvador Allende was just ousted by the United States because they just felt like it, right? That's something we need to talk about, and we need to say, it's really not okay to just oust a leader because it's not economically favorable for your country or corporations in your country, right? And as well, after the Iraq War, the United States should be very careful and not want to be escalating conflicts with countries in the Middle East, especially because the Middle East a couple years ago was more destabilized than it has ever been in modern history, and we're sort of starting to move towards a bit better of a balance of power. Like ISIS has really depleted into a shell of almost nothing. There is some stabilization now, but a war with Iran is only going to rip the Middle East up again, right? It's going to be a disaster, right, if this happens. Not just because it's very likely that many civilians will die, as they did in Iraq. Over 100 civilians died because of the Iraq War, right? It would be foolish to say that Iran, who has a stronger military, if we go to war, if the United States goes to war with them, that an equal amount of civilians or even more civilians can end up dying. Not to mention sending American troops into battle against Iran. How much of a disaster that would be, right? And the reason I say this to you is not because that I think that me a Canadian citizen is going to have this huge impact on American foreign policy, right? I know that. I know I'm not going to be talking directly to Trump here. I say this as a Canadian to you, presumably mostly other Canadians, right? Because we have to understand that we have fallen in line with the United States on so many issues for far too long, and we cannot continue to do that, especially when they do things like what they've done here. Like there's been a drone strike on an Iraqi airport that's killed a general second in command in Iran. That's not a very that's not really diplomatic handling of this. And this is something that the United States and Iran have gone back and forth forever, and there hasn't really been much de-escalation effort, right? Like the United States is we have to hold them to account because they're the greatest military power in the world. We have to make sure that they're not, threatening, or sort of encroaching on other countries here, and going to war with other countries because it suits their interest or whatever, right? It's very scary to see. It's very scary to see what's going on right now, and the fact that we've almost normalized people sharing memes about World War III and getting drafted, as unlikely as I think World War III is to ever happen, especially in this instance with Iran. It's scary that we've normalized the United States just sort of going to war with countries that are far smaller than it, you know? And I think in Iran, yes, there is a huge there. Iran is a huge human rights violator. Has sponsored terrorist groups. Iran is. I'm absolutely not saying that the actions of the government of Iran are okay at all. It's they're not. They are a state sponsor of terror in a lot of cases, right? But we also have to hold the United States to account and make sure that American aircraft aren't entering Iranian space, right? Or whatever, drone striking military, high up military officers in Iran. That's not something you can just do. Like if that was any other country. Like the thing is, the United States has military bases all around Iran. If you look at the map, there's at least 20 military bases of the United States around Iran. I have never seen an Iranian. Has there ever been an Iranian ship that's like crawling up the east coast of the United States? No, because it doesn't happen unless it's the United States. It for some reason is sort of only okay when the United States does it. If an Iranian ship was crawling up the east coast of the United States, it would be blasted to bits immediately, right? But when the United States does it, it's okay, you know? We have to sort of challenge that status quo here and say, you know, you can't just encroach on other countries' independence, even if, yes, of course, they're committing human rights violations. You have to work that out in and oftentimes a non-military way, right? And not, you know, threaten other countries' sovereignty, especially when it's just you. It's not the United. You're not working with the United Nations to fix this problem. You're just going out and drone striking, you know, whatever. And a lot of civilians are killed in drone strikes. You can't. That's not how you deal with this sort of issue. You go to the international community. You talk to the UN. You have a, you know, a general assembly about Iran, whatever, right? You don't do it through military action, through drone striking air bases, through overthrowing democratically elected leaders. That's not how you handle foreign policy. And I think we need to start calling that out, right? We can't just bend to the United States' will anymore. As Canadians, we really have to call it out when they are making serious foreign policy blunders. We can't just let it go anymore. All right. If there is one takeaway, excuse me, if there's one takeaway that you will have from today, I want it to be that you should question when the United States takes military action in the Middle East, whether it be through war or just through, you know, their regular drone strikes that they do on 7 different countries, right? Question that. If any other country did that, would it be okay? Right? If any other country, if Iran or Iraq or Pakistan or Egypt, if they did that, would it be okay? Of course it wouldn't be okay, right? But because it's the United States, it's normal for some reason. We really have to question that status quo and say, hey, maybe the United States shouldn't be doing that. Hey, maybe they should be going through the UN. Maybe our Canadian diplomats should be saying, you know what, we don't support that. You should be going through the international community for this. That's what I want you to take away from today. Okay? Now, I saw one comment. If a third world war was inevitable, would you support the idea of a draft? Ooh, that's a way too. I don't know. I mean, that's getting too. You're getting too far ahead here. First of all, if Iran and the United States do go to war, which first of all, I sort of already doubt. I would sort of scrutinize that claim. Even if they do go to war, it's not going to be a world war. Okay, this is not going to happen, right? This is not going to be like World War I or World War II, where countries start jumping in. It won't happen, right? It'll probably be a similar deal to the Iraq War, where, you know, yes, obviously it was a disaster, but it's not going to be, you know, to the proportions of World War II, right? And you know, that I can't even comment on a draft, right? Like, we're not dealing with a World War III situation here, so I'm not even going to comment on the idea of a draft. But yeah, just take away the notion that, you know, you can't just change a country's leader, especially a democratically elected leader, just because you want to, right? Especially if it's not for humanitarian reasons, especially if it's for economic reasons. Let's, you know, one more time. I know I've said it like 4 times already. Look at Mohammad Mossadegh, right? Democratically elected leader, started to nationalize Iran's oil industry and was ousted by the United States, and the United States reinstalled the dictatorial Shah, right? Now, that was 1953. But in a political history, 1953 is not that long ago, okay? Maybe that has something to do with the present conditions in Iran. I don't know. You be the judge of that. Salvador Allende, the same thing in Chile, started nationalizing copper mines that were owned by the United States. The United States led a coup against him, had a 17-year military dictatorship in which Chileans could not afford basic food, couldn't have 3 meals a day. You know, you be the judge. That's all I have to say about this. I think that's where we're going to wrap up the show today. So thank you very much for watching. Subscribe to the show, share it with your friends, like the stream. Yeah. Tune in next week.